All right. Happy Friday night there, paranormal peeps. Jason Hewlett here, paranormal network manager and sometimes ghost hunter. Have a new guest on this week, a renowned cryptozoologist, Ken Gerhard, who's appeared on several television programs across the Travel Channel. He's published multiple books on the subject of cryptozoology. He's actually been on paranormal network programs like That Bigfoot Show and We Want to Believe. And I'm excited that he's able to join us here on this Friday night. Ken, welcome.
Good evening, Jason. Thank you so much for having me on tonight. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. And how is Ogie doing?
The Ogie's doing really good as far as I know. It's kind of the middle of winter here, and it's been a cold one, so I think he's laying really low at the bottom
Yeah,
of Lake Okanagan at the moment,
makes sense.
awaiting your arrival when you can make it up to this way, Ken.
It's on my bucket list, man. I got to get up to Okanagan. It is one of the meccas of cryptozoology. As much as people are fascinated with the Loch Ness monster and some of these of Champlain, Ogopogo is a pretty strong argument for some of the best evidence in terms of number of eyewitness sightings, the legend of Nahatik, and the fold-in footage. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff there that's very interesting.
Well, it's I mean, and we'll kind of get into we could probably even start with Ogopogo, but I think for maybe the uninitiated, what is cryptozoology and what is a cryptozoologist? I mean, that's kind of the fancy word for it,
Y-
right?
Yes, yes, certainly. A lot of people wonder what it's all about. The word cryptozoology from Latin means the search or study of hidden animals, search for or study of hidden animals. Crypto means hidden, and zoology, of course, pertains to the study of animals. So, by hidden animals, technically what we're talking about is things like the Ogopogo, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Loch Ness Monster, Chupacabra, Black Panthers. I mean, there's all these strange, mysterious creatures around the world that, people have been, you know, telling stories and accounts of for centuries in many cases. And the scientific community, the establishment, is obviously hesitant to get involved in this kind of stuff because it's pretty controversial. So I'm a layman, and I don't have a scientific degree or anything, but I follow a zoological and a scientific methodology. So that's kind of how I look at all of these mysteries, is through the prism of zoology, and that's how cryptozoology should be done. Could it be an animal? What kind of animal? You know, Trying to predict and speculate about patterns. What does it eat? Where does it live? That kind of stuff. So if
Which
it
is interesting.
exists, you got to have that qualifier there.
Well, we do that with paranormal investigation, right? We try to apply the same principles to it, like as much of a scientific method as possible, in the hopes that we can prove that it does exist, or one day will be accepted as such. And welcome, Matt V and Vinny Franco. Um, so, what I guess let's tell a bit of your story. What got you into this, Ken? I mean, we've talked about it before, but just for some of those people listening, if you like a Cliff Notes version of what got you interested in cryptozoology and monster hunting.
Yeah, it's just been a lifelong passion, Jason. It started when I was a kid, about 8 or 9. I was already loving monsters and monster movies. I was very much into creatures and animals, had a lot of exotic pets, and spent a lot of time in the woods with my father, who was a forestry professor. And so when I found out about Bigfoot in 1976, I saw it on a TV show, and it was just like, something inside of me clicked. I mean, it became kind of an obsession. And, the possibility that there could be this, you know, kind of a monster, but also possibly an undiscovered animal or species. It was all rolled up into one here in North America. So a lot of stuff happened around that time. I saw a thing called the Minnesota Iceman at the Minnesota State Fair that summer. There was a $6 Million Man episode with Bigfoot and the Legend of Boggy Creek. And so Bigfoot was really big in 1976. And so that kind of started it for me. And then my mother was a huge influence and was very adventurous. She was a travel agent, so she took me all over the world. I've been to 26 different countries on 6 continents and had some pretty amazing experiences as a kid. And wherever I went, I was always, investigating or researching the local legends of strange beasts and things. And then when I was 15 years old, my mom arranged for us to vacation at Loch Ness in Scotland, which, of course, home to the alleged Nessie, the mythological lake monster there. And that's when I was, attempting field research. I had an 8mm movie camera. I interviewed the locals and took notes and things. So I certainly never planned to make a career out of this. And but I've been very blessed, and I'm very passionate about it. So I write books. I've been on some TV shows. I do lectures around the country, and yeah, so that's basically what I do.
We've got sort of a comment here. Basically, my tutor keeps lecturing on how cryptids are 100% fake, and I'm so glad I can see others who understand me and my research. And I think that's something. There's a lot of people who don't believe, say, in a Bigfoot or a Loch Ness or Ogopogo, because the lake ones, it's like, well, it's a body of water. Where do they go?
Yeah.
Right. And then Bigfoot, it's like, well, we'd have found a body in the woods right now. What do you sort of say to naysayers in that sense?
Yeah, I totally get it. And I think one of my best attributes as an investigator is that I truly am objective. I really, I try to look at things in terms of evidence and probability and things like that. So I encourage people to think critically, to be skeptical, to question and challenge when people make claims. I think that's part of the process. And, admittedly, it's a very small percentage of people, maybe like 22% of the population that thinks that Bigfoot could even possibly be real. The vast majority of people think it's crazy. So I get that. And there are some good, skeptical arguments, like you said. Why haven't we found a body of a Bigfoot? Why is there no evidence in the fossil record that we've been found, considering that so many other species in North America are so well represented in like Pleistocene deposits and things? What are the food sources? You look at Loch Ness, it's an oligotrophic lake. It's very nutrient poor, low fish population, but yet supposedly there's this giant or population of giant animals, so I love the skeptical arguments, and I certainly, again, try to look at this stuff as objectively as possible. And Jason, another thing I should, point out is that I've never seen any of these things with my own eyes. I've never seen Bigfoot. I think I've been close to them and heard them, but I've never seen one. I've never seen another cryptid, so I can't say that I'm 100% convinced that any of them exist. But in many cases, I'm fairly convinced, just based on a lifetime of research, that, yeah, they probably do exist, as amazing as it sounds.
That something is out there.
There's something to it. Yeah, it's not just a cultural phenomenon where people are just making up stories. There's too many consistent threads that run through all of this, so.
Absolutely. Just want to say hello to Renee, who's back with us again this week. Big fan of all stuff, including, Sasquatch, UFOs, extraterrestrial aliens, which are a different kettle of fish than what we're talking about. I guess the one argument in defense of something like a Bigfoot is that, we don't find bare bodies in the woods either, Ken. So, and with looking through lakes, some of them are pretty deep. Loch Ness and Lake Okanagan are both very similar, very, very deep bodies of water. There's rumors of caves, etc. What would be your process, say, when you do go and research or try to find these cryptids? Like with a Bigfoot, what would you go out monster hunting for Bigfoot? What's a good way to try to attempt to find one?
Well, certainly each cryptid is different in terms of its alleged habitat and things. So searching for a lake monster like Ogie is much different than searching for Sasquatch or, a Thunderbird or whatever. But in terms of Bigfoot or Sasquatch research, there are some methodologies that have kind of been established through the years by serious Bigfoot researchers. And a skeptic could argue, well, it certainly hasn't worked out very well because you haven't got one yet. So it's like, yeah, but there are new things that we're trying to mix in from time to time, right? So obviously, in lieu of physical evidence, which, is the one thing that we're always hopeful of, is that we'll find a body or a bone or something like that, a tooth. The next thing is physical trace evidence. So we have a pretty good data set of footprints, Bigfoot and Sasquatch footprints, that have been found for decades all over the Pacific Northwest and North America. They're fairly consistent as far as the size, the shape, the morphology, and we've made plaster casts of those, photographed them, and sometimes just lifted them out of the ground so we have something physical to study. There have been alleged droppings and hairs. That's a little bit more problematic in terms of coming to a conclusive, determination. Photographic evidence would be next. And of course, you have the iconic Patterson-Gimlin footage from October 20th, 1967. That's the gold standard of photographic evidence. There's some controversial things, films and photos after that. But I know a number of Bigfoot researchers that do go out, obviously, with a camera. And particularly at night now, we do a lot of research because we think they're nocturnal. They're moving around more. We're using night vision, thermal imaging. camera traps or trail cameras, so you're basically just trying to get evidence that way as well. And then some Bigfoot researchers do like, call blasting. Now I know a lot of that's been kind of popularized on TV shows where, like Finding Bigfoot, they always like to do the Bigfoot howls. I don't do that. I don't know their language, and I don't want to piss them off or send a mating call out there or something that I'm not intending to do. So I do use sometimes standard traditional game calls, with re-recorded sounds of, animals in distress or things that might evoke a response. And then you hear, wood knocking. That's another attempted kind of a hitting a stick against a tree and making a loud knocking noise, because there have been these wood knock sounds. I've heard them a couple of times in Bigfoot active areas that are just like, it's just this loud knocking sound, one or two raps in a row in the middle of the night. And so yeah, but the new technologies that are getting better, DNA collection, we're getting better. It's becoming less expensive to have testing done, more accessible. You have eDNA now where you can collect soil and water. The thermal imaging is getting better. Drones obviously are becoming a big deal. A lot of researchers using those. So there's a lot of toys. And Jason, I think I've told you this before, but very much like being a ghost hunter, the best part about being a cryptozoologist is probably the toys.
Oh,
come on.
Big time. It's my favorite part of ghost hunting, other than hopefully seeing a ghost, right?
Yeah. We love the gadgets. If you don't see a ghost or a Bigfoot, you've got a new toy you can play with in the woods and kind of see what it does. So
we got someone here. Greg personally knows of 4 people who claim to have seen Bigfoot near where he lives in northern Minnesota. Is that kind of one of the hot spots, Ken, from your knowledge?
Yeah, I mean it's up there, the Midwest and some of those areas. And by the way, I'm going to be appearing at the Minnesota Bigfoot Conference in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, in October. Nice. So I'll be up there speaking. Northern Minnesota and also the North Woods of Wisconsin and Michigan. A lot of activity there through the years, and that could extend. There are no political delineations as far as Bigfoot is concerned. He doesn't need a visa or anything to cross the border. So we assume that there are Bigfoots or Sasquatches all throughout Canada in the arboreal forests of the Northeast and Ontario and Quebec and some of those areas, Manitoba, and then extending obviously and with a heavy concentration there in British Columbia, but extending somewhat into the Rockies of Alberta. So, wherever you have pristine wilderness habitat. And moreover, and this is interesting, Jason, is that wherever you have healthy bear populations, you seem to have lots of Bigfoot or Sasquatch activity. Well, a skeptic might spin that and say, well, people are seeing bears. That's why. Well, that's possibly a small part of it. But I think it's moreover that Bigfoots or Sasquatches seem to have a diet very similar to bears. They're generalist omnivores, opportunistic. They eat everything, according to the reports. And which they would have to, because if they're about the size of a large bear, 800 to 1,000 pounds, high metabolism. And so, I mean, this is all speculation, but, wherever you got wilderness area and food sources and lots of game and things to eat, I think that's where you would find them.
Well, and I know, like all through where I live currently up here in British Columbia, it's prime Bigfoot territory, which is what spurred us to go out and do our search last year.
Yes, no doubt. I've done a teeny bit of Sasquatch research in British Columbia, mostly up in the Garibaldi Range in 2014. So that was pretty cool. That was kind of where Renee DeHinden, the iconic Canadian Sasquatch investigator, spent a lot of time up there. So, but I haven't been to Harrison Hot Springs and, or some of those Vancouver Island, some of those areas where you have a lot of alleged activity. And
we're hoping to get to Harrison this year. Sorry. We're hoping to get down to Harrison this year because it's about 2.5 hours, 3 hours from where we are.
Right on. Mm-hmm.
Bill Morris, someone who's asking if you're going to go down under to study, and I don't want to mispronounce it. THYLACINE. Like
it's my friend Bill Morris. Yeah, the thylacine. I know that is.
What is that?
It's a Latin name. Thylacinus cynocephalus, also known as the Tasmanian tiger, which is not a tiger at all. It is a carnivorous marsupial, basically a kangaroo with sharp teeth and
Okay.
stripes on its haunches, which is why the locals first coined it Tasmanian tiger. But it's an animal that was sadly driven to extinction, we think, in 1936 and possibly up to 1980s or 2000s, or possibly still extant. And Tasmania, an island off the southern coast of Australia, is where most of the sightings are, although there are also sightings throughout southeastern Australia and parts of Western Australia. So it's a cryptid because it's not supposed to exist according to scientists. It's extinct. It's no longer viable, but there have been hundreds of alleged sightings, some controversial films and things taken. So it's something I am hoping to go search for in the very near future, possibly this year if things get a little less crazy in the world.
Well, and
Well,
hopefully
thanks,
that's
Bill.
coming soon. Like, hopefully
Yeah.
that's coming soon. It sounds almost like every country and every continent kind of has its cryptids. Do you think that's true, Ken? Like there's it's like a worldwide phenomenon, not just North America or like Scotland. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Except for Antarctica, I don't know if I've heard of anything down there, but I don't think we count that as a true continent. But
It's cold, and you don't. Who wants
it's
to spend too much
cold.
time
Not a
there?
lot of people there. Not a lot going on. Yeah, you're right. And a lot of these archetypes are global. So Bigfoot and Sasquatch, of course, we're very familiar with here in North America. But you have in Asia the Yeti, or abominable snowman in the Himalaya. You have the Russian Mongolian Almas. You have the Chinese Yeren, the Indian Monday Barung, the Vietnamese Goirung, the Dev, the Kaptar. So there's a lot of different Asian versions of Bigfoot. And then in Australia, they have something called the Yowie, or
Yep.
the Yahoo, which is basically like a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch. And Africa, a few, more of the Littlefoot types. Europe used to have them potentially. If you look at like a lot of the tradition of the Green Man,
Hmm.
which is in Europe, is like basically a wild man that lives in the woods and he's in the brush. And they also call them Wodewas, was a German name. So yeah, those are worldwide. And then lake monsters, Nessie, Ogie, Champ, Russia, Scandinavia, Japan. You have very similar lake monsters all around the world. And then you have very distinctive cryptids like the Tasmanian tiger. In Africa, they have the Mokele Mbembe, possibly a surviving dinosaur. Mongolia has the Mongolian death worm. So as you
Hmm.
travel around the world, you have these kind of fun, distinct cryptids that have been reported in different habitats.
There's
Excuse
one
me.
here actually brought up the Ninghan, which may be in
Oh,
Antarctica.
okay. Admittedly, if I know what a Ninghan is, then I'm rusty on that one, so I don't remember. So feel free to chime in on the Ninghan. Is it an
Yeah, is it an
aquatic,
aquatic creature?
something that swims off the coast? Because there's not a lot of sustainable food on the actual continent. That's why everything lives kind of there on the shore.
Yeah, I've heard
Penguins.
of one, but I'm not quite sure what they are. A cryptid
Hmm.
campfire did
Maybe
a
like a
spot on.
mermaid type thing.
Yeah,
I
almost
know.
like it's an aquatic. It's not like a seal, but it's like that kind of thing. It seems like it's something that exists in and out of the water.
Okay.
Um,
Well, I'll make a note and maybe do a little bit of a refresher on that one.
there's also the Wendigo, which that's kind of
Yes.
a Canadian
Mm-hmm.
cryptid, which I always thought, and it's something a lot of these can seem to go back into whatever culture sort of native or aboriginal history. Am I correct? Like the Wendigo is very much a creature that was believed to be born out of eating human flesh. It's very almost like a spiritual kind of creature, right?
Yeah, there's some fringe cryptids that we don't know if they're really related to true cryptozoology in the animal kingdom or if they're more like supernatural or paranormal in nature. And I guess Wendigo, is one of those things that, based on a lot of the Native American traditions, like you said, it's throughout Canada, but I think primarily like the Ojibwe people and the Algonquins in Ontario and stuff, they're talking about the Wendigo, which is basically described as a giant man-like creature, very tall, which kind of reminds you of one of a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch potentially. But if you dig deeper, traditionally the Wendigo is not covered in hair, and it is very emaciated and skinny because it's basically he has this insatiable hunger, and he's a cannibal and he eats people, or it's just so he looks kind of sickly, but at the same time he's he's kind of like a zombie, like a big giant zombie type thing. So I don't know. It could pertain to Bigfoot or Sasquatch in some cases, but I've never really I personally have never interviewed a Wendigo eyewitness. Maybe that's because I'm in the wrong part of the continent here. You guys probably would have more opportunities. I know I have colleagues like Morgan Knutson out there in Alberta and Chad Lewis, Kevin Nelson here in Wisconsin have supposedly spoken to Wendigo eyewitnesses, but it's a weird one. So I don't really know what to say as far as it doesn't seem to fit within the paradigm of zoology. It seems to be more of a supernatural archetype, but I don't know.
And that kind of goes, sorry, Matt V has a question here. What are your thoughts, Ken, on the idea that Sasquatch may be a spectral or paranormal entity? And I mean, when you and I talked before, like about Mothman, that too is almost on the fringe. It's almost more of a supernatural, metaphysical being. Like, what do you think when people try to tie in that kind of stuff?
I understand why people, particularly people that already haven't been exposed to paranormal and some of those other kind of spiritual or non-physical, metaphysical kinds of phenomenon would wonder about that. I think if you made like a pros and cons box, this would be an interesting exercise. The pros for that potential theory that Bigfoot is paranormal is the fact that we don't have a body, which is true. We can't find remains anywhere. They seem to be very good at, like, a lot of people say they vanish, but I think they just are good at just getting away from us and running into the woods or camouflaging themselves and remaining still or whatever. And some people have said that there are foot trackways that stop in the middle of nowhere. I haven't really heard of any solid account of that. So those are really the pros. Is why can't we find them? Okay, it seems like we should have remains by now. So that's and the photographic evidence maybe not being very strong. The cons are that Bigfoot, the vast majority of Bigfoot accounts describe very natural situations. A Sasquatch crosses the road at night and walks in front of a car. That's the most common thing. People see them crossing the road at night on mountain roads. It's eating a dead deer. It's drinking water. It's walking up the mountain. So those are all perfectly normal behaviors that we see in all types of animal species. Also, it fits very well within the fossil record. Things that look like Bigfoot were around starting around a few million years ago in Africa. They were smaller, but they looked basically just like Bigfoot. They were like ape men, if you will, early hominins, right? Bipedal, walking on two legs, very robust, powerful shoulders, not as intelligent as us. They had a receding cranium because their brains were smaller. So, isn't that interesting that things that look like Bigfoot did exist, mostly in Africa and somewhat in Asia and Europe, tens of thousands or millions of years ago. So, those two things I think are the best, cons in terms of arguing against the supernatural paranormal Bigfoot entity is it looks like an animal, it behaves like an animal, it fits squarely into the middle of evolution and our, the taxonomic world.
I hate, and I'm sure you do too, Ken, like the idea of trying to explain an unknown with another unknown. Like, we haven't proven UFOs are a thing yet. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those kind of things too.
Yeah, that's the mind kind of wanting to, and this I can't think of the term off the top of my head, but it's a tendency for all humans to want to find meaningful connections in things, and particularly with problematic things like unexplained. Things that are unexplained that we don't understand or wrap our minds around. It seems like it would be a natural sort of unconscious exercise for us to say, UFOs, Bigfoot, connect them. Like maybe they're the same thing. So I don't know. It's a fascinating aspect of the way that people sort of view this phenomenon.
I agree. She has one kind of comment, like, I don't think Wendigo eyewitnesses really live to tell the story most of the time, to be honest. Maybe that's the truth.
Yeah,
I'm not too sure.
That's a good point. That's why we don't have the witnesses, because they're,
they've been eaten. How about the Jersey Devil, which I know is another, that too kind of fits more into Mothman kind of territory, right? Like, because no one's really seen, has anybody seen a Jersey Devil? Like, they've been,
yeah, I've interviewed one Jersey Devil eyewitness. I've got one guy that I've interviewed. He claims he saw it in 1977 when he was a young man. He and his friend were kind of riding the roads at night outside of Yardley, Pennsylvania, which is right across from the Pine Barrens of southern Pennsylvania there, and that this thing crossed the road, and he drew a sketch for me. I interviewed him at length. I've included this in some of my books, but he said it basically, it was on 4 legs, kind of the body shape of like a Doberman Pinscher, but it had like a head like a kind of a monkey, like a spider monkey kind of, or capuchin type of thing. And then he said it had wings and a long tail. So you're talking about a hexaped, something with, hexapod, I'm sorry, hexapod, something with 6 limbs, which is really weird. But, he's very sincere. That's what he saw. They had a spotlight on it, saw it cross the road. And I don't know. I mean, I guess that would be the closest thing to a Jersey Devil sighting that I can think of in modern times. Now, I'm glad you brought this up, Jason, because this is actually like January is the anniversary of the big Jersey Devil, Leeds Devil flap of 1909, 113 years ago. And the main sighting happened on the night of January 19th, 1909, which was the Nelson Evans and his wife claimed that they saw the Jersey Devil prancing around on the roof of their shed for several minutes, and reported it to the newspaper. And that's the famous, the guy for the newspaper did a sketch based on their description. And that's the famous image that everyone thinks of, with the horse-like head, the bat-like wings, the long, hoofed legs and things. So, yeah, it seems to be another fringe one, because it is just such a weird physical description. It seems to be a chimera, a mixture of different types of animals that don't belong together. Now, it's interesting that a lot of people have actually, when they see pictures of the Jersey Devil, they propose that maybe there was a hammerhead bat flying around. I don't know if you've seen this hypothesis, but if you look at a picture of a hammerhead bat, which is a large bat with a 5-foot wingspan from western equatorial Africa, it does have a horse-like head. It's got bat-like wings. It looks a lot like the Jersey Devil in some ways, smaller than what they'd reported back in 1909. But just to finally try to, for my own sense of like resolving this, Jason, I went back and I looked at the weather report for the night of the Nelson Evans sighting in January 9th, 1909, in that area around Gloucester City, New Jersey. Guess what the temperature was outside?
What was it?
I guess it'd be random. 1 degree.
1 degree. Okay.
It was very freaking cold. Okay. Now, if you know anything about hammerhead bats, again, it's a subtropical species from West Africa, lives in extreme heat and humidity. It would die of hypothermia, within a few minutes, I think, if you let it go in southern New Jersey in January of 1909. It wouldn't be alive long.
I agree.
So I don't think the hammerhead bat is a good explanation. What I do like and appreciate about the people that bring it up is that it is a good exercise in using a kind of a pragmatic explanation and saying, well, maybe it's not a monster. Maybe it's just like an out of place animal or something that people aren't used to seeing. And I think that is encouraging to see people kind of thinking like that, in terms of always, kind of going to the extreme of it's a demon or,
I
coming
agree.
from another dimension or something that's far out there. So,
but much like with the Mothman, there's a type of owl that people think it might be because of the way its eye shine is more red when it glows, and it has that kind of shape that a lot of people talk about, right? And,
like
we're really good at misinterpreting sizes of things and
barred owl.
Yeah.
Jason, do you know how big a barred owl is? It's like this freaking big, dude. It's like, it's tiny. So I don't know. That's always been my problem with that Mothman thing. It's an owl. It's like, dude, owls are not. I mean, the largest owls in North America are the great horned owls, Bubo virginianus, and I think those have like a 5-foot wingspan. And yes, we've all been surprised by a big owl taking off at night when we're driving down like a lonely road and suddenly there's an owl on the road and it looks good. But come on, man. What people were describing back in 1966 and 67 was a 6.5-foot tall man-like thing with human-like legs, giant red glowing eyes, 10-foot wingspan. So that couldn't be an owl. I don't know. I don't think that's a good hypothesis, personally.
We've just got a couple minutes here. There's a person has a question. It's maybe more for me about haunted demonic dolls. Are they real people or made up stories about dolls? It's not really sort of your neck of the woods, but do you have any thoughts on that? I guess like, you know, as someone who's been interested in all this kind of stuff, Ken,
Well,
I don't put much stock in it myself,
no,
personally.
I have tagged along on some ghost hunts through the years. I have friends that do paranormal investigation, and I find it fascinating. And sometimes it's fun to kind of tag along and go to a haunted location. And what I've noticed, Jason, in several different locations around the country, is that there are certain archetypes of spirits that are put in different locations. So like there's always like a maintenance man that hung himself in the basement. That's one that I've heard in like 2 or 3 haunted locations. Now, another one that's really scary is the little girl. It seems like there's always a ghost of a little girl, and oftentimes she has a doll, or there's a doll that was left behind that moves by itself or whatever. And I think that's an interesting. I'm not saying that there's not something, some grain of truth behind all of this, and that there are spirits of little girls, and who knows, there may be haunted dolls. I can't say for sure, but what I do know is that how people perceive paranormal activity and the supernatural, and the fact that that archetype is often the scariest in any haunted location I go to. There could be a ghost of an axe murderer running around, but people are really scared of the little girl, with the doll or the
Yep.
doll, And so I don't know, just like people are freaked out by clowns. A lot of people, I think it's kind of a similar type of. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little bit too philosophical here, but it seems like an interesting common thread that runs through all of us, that we have this terrible fear of little things that are like us but smaller, like dolls and children, and well, I mean, not living children, and you know what I'm saying. So.
I do, and we recently investigated Mandy, which is Canada's equivalent to Annabelle, and we had nothing happen.
Oh, okay.
Like,
yeah.
we did. There's lots of stories, but nothing happened.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I'm not, like I said, I'm not totally poo-pooing it. I know, I'm certainly, I think there is something to the paranormal. Okay, I'll say that. I've experienced a couple things, not too many, no apparitions, but I've seen doors slam and, had that weird feeling in your body where there's like electricity suddenly surging through. And so, there's things that we don't understand. And I certainly think that the argument that there's this residual energy in certain places that you can go and experience things, seems like a lot of people are experiencing those. So I'm not going to argue with the paranormal, but it's certainly not in my wheelhouse, because Jason, I don't know a ton about that stuff. So.
Well, no, it's sort of a bit more in mine, and it's the same thing. I have no doubt there's something out there. It's just figuring out what exactly it is. I sort of haven't seen evidence of like objects or dolls being possessed by a spirit of anything yet in my almost 20 years of doing this. We're going to wrap it up here pretty quick, Ken. I guess there's one thing that we talked about one time. How you mentioned how a lot of these lakes where the lake monsters are very similar.
Yeah.
And a lot of them seem to be along the same latitudinal line. What do you think? What are sort of the common traits that could compare these, just before we wrap up here?
Yeah, in a nutshell, if you look at Loch Ness, Okanagan, Lake Champlain, the lakes that I was talking about in Russia, Japan, Scandinavia, Iceland, they're all about along on that same line of latitude in the northern hemisphere, from like 40 to 60 degrees north, and really like a high concentration around 50, I think. So they're you can kind of group them together there in the same type of climates. And they're also the similar types of lakes in terms of how they were formed. They're all glacial lakes that were basically carved out at the end of the ice age, when the glaciers retreated and melted, and they carved these big gorges. And so they're very deep lakes, cold water, and they're often inhabited by the same types of species, salmonid types of fishes like salmon, trout, and eels, and things like that. So it's interesting that you have these similar characteristics where lake monsters are reported, and at least to me, that is compelling. That you have a pattern that is fairly consistent and would make sense for an unknown species that was traveling. And this is, now I'm kind of getting out there or down the rabbit hole in terms of these things might be living in the ocean too, and they travel into the lakes through rivers. It's speculation, but there have been sightings in the ocean too of things like the Loch Ness Monster and Ogopogo. So it's a fascinating mystery.
It is. I think it's one of my favorites, is the aquatic monster concept, I think, personally with myself. We actually do have one question here from someone, Ivy, that maybe you could just quickly answer here, Ken. Just me, or does there seem to be more information on Bigfoot than Dogman? I wonder whose origin has been around longer. Do you have any idea about that? I didn't even start hearing about Dogman until recently myself. So
Yeah, Dogman is like new kids on the block in the field of cryptozoology. It's Dogman is really, I mean, you can find, obviously you hear the stories about the Michigan Dogman go back, but look at Native American traditions. You don't really find a lot of Dogman type references in North America. There are Bigfoots or Sasquatches, in terms of, hairy man-like savages, giants that live in the mountains or the woods. Dogman seems to really have come on strong since the late 1980s, early 1990s, starting in Wisconsin with the Beast of Bray Road and the Michigan Dogman, and then it just really spread out. And now you have Dogman accounts all over the world. I know it's become a pretty hot topic based on all the popular podcasts and things. But it's Bigfoot. I say there's really a lot more evidence, a lot more accounts, traditions. Dogman seems, I'm not saying Dogman doesn't exist, whatever it is, but it's something new. It's just kind of sprung onto the scene in recent decades, and it is blowing up as far as the number of eyewitness accounts and things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've only really heard of it in the last, sort of 10 years, 15 years. That's really started coming onto my radar, and I might, even be misinterpreting some of that timeline myself. Ken, it's been awesome to have you on and to talk to you. It's always enjoyable. I think we're getting a lot of people leaving comments. We'll have to bring you back if you'd be up for coming back.
Always, Jason. And enjoy talking to you, my friend. I'd love to come back sometime real soon. And yeah, stay safe up there. Don't let the Sasquatch or the Ogie get you.
I won't, my friend. You stay safe down there as well. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another new show and a different guest. Have a great weekend and stay spooky, everyone.